Let's begin with the prayer. Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
Friend, beloved God,
Friend, beloved God,
Great Masters,
Great Masters,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashai,
Lahiri Mahashai,
Swami Sri Yukteswara,
Swami Sri Yukteswara,
Paramahansa Yogananda,
Paramahansa Yogananda,
and saints of East and West,
saints of East and West,
we invoke your presence,
we invoke your presence,
stilling our thoughts to your wisdom,
stilling our thoughts to your wisdom,
stilling our bodies to your presence,
stilling our bodies to your presence,
stilling our emotions to thy love.
stilling our emotions to thy love.
Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirod,
Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirod,
come to us.
come to us.
Om.
Om.
Peace.
Peace.
Amen.
Amen.
So let's have a few moments of silence. Draw the curtain of the daytime activities, draw to a close. Enter the temple of silence within. Into the eternal now, the time machine that knows no space, no time, no barriers. As we fast forward into Treta Yuga, Satya Yuga, let us be still, perfectly still. As we step into the future, imagine this green earth beautiful, clean air and water, the inhabitants striving for spiritual and personal perfection, the presence of God seen and felt in every flower, in every rain shower, in all whom we meet. Does not this paradise live in our hearts, in our souls? Om Shanti. Amen.
Wow. We just meditated and there it is.
We're practically in Treta Yuga now. Is this okay? Can I? Okay. So we're going to take a little bit of a journey tonight, more than a little bit of a journey. We're going to, so Dakshina, can you, this is the whole thing, so you have to move all the way down to Treta Yuga. I show it as slide 25. So, you know, the book is organized. First off, how many of you had already read this since its publication? I'm curious. Okay, not as many as I would have thought. So for most of you, it's your first read. Very interesting. Okay. Of course, on the other hand, this is not new to many of us here. It's been part of the teachings here at Ananda since the very beginning. So, in the writing of the book, as I said on the first class, it's not necessarily how one would present this material, but we're trying to stick to the book so we can read together and sort of be on the same track. It was incumbent on them as authors of the book to explain the four ages. Makes sense to start at the lowest age and work your way up, so you could sort of build a foundation. But in fact, tonight, when Padma gets into descending, when we come down the arc, really much of the most fascinating material begins for us because the meaning for us is not only in the future, and in fact, the future isn't all that meaningful to us here and now, we yogis who live in the present. It's perhaps more interesting, I think, for most of us, in a rewrite of history, and to look back with what we believe we know, at least we've been taught, and therefore accept that we know from the past, and to view our understanding of who we are and where we've come from and so forth with new eyes, I think, is actually what makes this material the most interesting. And so we're going to embark, hopefully, as we can, and it's my commitment to breeze through my Treta Yuga as quickly as I'm capable so that we can begin that process of the descending.
Just to say, tonight we have actually 4 chapters.
Yeah, it's a lot of material, so I'm not known for my brevity, but I'll do the best I can. Imagine now, this is 2014, right? 2,000 years from now, 4,014, and Treta transitional hasn't even begun. 2,085 years. Now, 2,085 years takes us pretty much back to the life of Jesus Christ. I mean, most of what we imagine we know, and that's all it is, as Napoleon said, and history is a lie agreed upon, has taken place in the last 2,000 years. Maybe a little bit more, maybe 3,000, and that's even a stretch for most of us. So this is a long way out there. So at 4100 AD, okay, here we are in the dotted line down here, just coming out of ascending Kali Yuga. We have another practically 2,000 years still to go in Dwapara before Treta begins. 4100 AD, Treta begins a 300-year transitional Sandhi. Before 4400 AD, it actually begins. And then it goes on for 3,000 years before another 300-year Sandhi. So we're talking a long way out there. Sri Yukteswara wrote, the grasping power of the human, I don't know if I typed that right, the grasping power of the human intellect is at present, 100 years ago, so limited that it would be quite useless to attempt to make the matter known to the general public about Treta Yuga. So, where does that leave us, right? So, okay, we have to think about it. Okay, you can, now that we thought about it, huh? Treta Yuga, what? Okay. You know, he explains, and I love what the authors have done because they just have a great way of putting it. We here today, we look back at Kali Yuga, Dark Ages, Middle Ages, and all that, and we feel like we know a lot about that. But it's like an adult, like you and I, looking back at our childhood, our past. We can relate to it again. What we remember is probably deeply filtered and all that, but at least we can relate to it as ours, okay? Even Dwapara as a future. Imagine, well, I think most of us are adults. As adults, we know ourselves somewhat well. And so, you know, maybe you're 25 years old, 35, whatever it is, you can kind of look forward to your life ahead, whatever's left, and you can relate to it. You could at least, I imagine when I was 17 years old, I thought, 35. And I really struggled to imagine being 35 years old. And I just shrugged my shoulders and I said, I just don't know. I'm not sure I could do it. But nonetheless, I think most of us at this point can kind of do that. But Treta Yuga, they say, is more like a child, sort of like I was at 17, but even younger, trying to imagine the world and mind of an adult. I think that works for me, at least. Okay. The other point they make out is Kali and Dwapara being the first two. Yes, I did. And I was waiting for somebody to notice.
I noticed it instantly.
Yes, that's Tulsi.
Okay.
I needed a baby picture, and I figured I got a lot of baby pictures. Okay, so Kali and Dwapara, being the first of 4 ages, have something in common, and they're both mostly materialistic. Kali, obviously, we are having fun manipulating matter with the knowledge of energy, but we're still very matter-bound. Okay, we're in our pleasure palace of our adolescence, essentially, at least here in early Dwapara. Okay. Other analogies they make, Kali Yuga being like having, how many had a crystal radio set? And you put it on metal, remember that? That was so cool. My town had 1 AM radio station, but I hid under the covers to play it. So Kali Yuga, AM radio, Dwapara, FM, Treta, shortwave. In Kali, humanity can only comprehend the outer form through the senses, we, energy. But now in Treta Yuga, our perception is of consciousness, of thought. Another analogy made is Kali Yuga is like the Shudra, the peasant, who's uncreative, who lives moment to moment for pleasure, pain, avoidance of pain, and so forth. Dwapara, as we've said before, merchant consciousness. Making money is the hallmark of Dwapara. Treta is more like the warrior. I don't mean the warrior in battle, obviously, here, but in the way that we here and in the study of these qualities of consciousness, understand the warrior is one who works for self-improvement, self-mastery. Whereas Dwapara, technology reveals and manipulates energy and space, Treta, the mind reveals and manipulates energy and time. Okay? We're going to transcend time. Dwapara uses the reason and intellect to gain mastery over energy, but does so mostly for self-interest, okay, for more enjoyment of matter. Whereas Treta uses intuitional attunement to achieve mental self-mastery. Just like that. Okay. They give some wonderful examples. You know, everything is real right here and now. It's just that, just as a Kali Yuga man, maybe native Indians would walk around with their moccasins and get stuck in the sticky black stuff, and they didn't realize it was oil or what they could do with it. So too, the reality of mental consciousness, Treta Yuga consciousness, is all around us, but we're not attuned intelligence-wise and vibrationally speaking, in terms of our magnetism, to see it all around. And so it is that healers, and there are, of course, at any given point in any age, very famous, well-known people who can heal people. You can go to East-West and talk to intuitives. You can have animal intuitives. Most such people, even with those gifts, use them pretty much subconsciously. Okay, they have the gift, they have psychic sight or whatever it is they have, but they can't really tell you much about it. It's just simply there. In Treta Yuga, they will be consciously aware of how to develop and what they're doing. You think of saints who heal people or take on karma. Imagine taking on the karma of someone's illness. That can only really be done consciously, or at least if it's done purposely, it's done consciously. And so you know how to do it. Okay, but it's all around us. The power of the multiple personalities. I've not read too much about it, but I've read enough to know that on the onset of these different personalities, even physical characteristics, they use the example of a mole, can suddenly appear. Weight, shape of the face, color of the hair, all these things have been demonstrated, but they're subconscious. The ability to manipulate one's personal appearance or objective matter, the rain dances that would bring rain. By virtue of the declining age, they know what the mantras are, the sounds, and how to dance around or whatever, but they don't really have a clue how to do it. They're just imitating it, and there's enough attunement to it to make these things happen most of the time. But in Treta Yuga, that's okay, I won't take it personally. In Treta Yuga, they'll know how to manipulate these things. Think of the power of the placebo. I've always been told, and I've had some people confirm who know more than these, that if you can get a drug past the FDA and at least equal the placebo, you're good to go. I don't know that that's technically correct, but we do know that the double-blind tests use the power of the placebo as part of their testing. That's mind power. I mean, think of it. We don't normally think of it, but I think in terms of vitamins, you know, I don't know what the heck they're doing. If I skip them, I'm no different the next day, but I'm totally convinced they work. I'm not sure they actually do. We have this saying in yoga that awareness precedes control, and this is the key. Dwaparans are aware of the nature of energy and can use energy then for whatever reasons. Traitans, I've just coined a new word, please somebody take a note. Traitans can manipulate matter and energy through thought control. Telepathic communication becomes through the arc. Now remember, I said it's 3,000 years plus 3 plus 3, so that's 3,600 years through this process. So obviously there's an arc of development here, but nonetheless, it may well be that the use of writing, certainly, and even the spoken language will decline during the advancing ages of Treta. Isn't that incredible? Distance and time are, we already know through scientific testing and not to mention our own experience. What's that called when you have experience? Well, anyway, anecdotal evidence, that's it, that there is no barrier to telepathic communication by virtue of time or distance. In the autobiography of a yogi, when Sri Yukteswara was resurrected and he was in that hotel room in Bombay with a master 5 or 6 months after his physical passing, he was transferring a combination of words and idea tabloids. I'm not sure what tabloid means beyond a newspaper, but I get sort of an image of what was being transferred. As I said last week, a picture being worth 1,000 words. Imagine the transference of not just knowledge, but deeper intuitional understanding. The lifespans elongate, and so people can develop their intuition, they point out, they might live perhaps an average of 300 years. It's hard to say, but much longer than ourselves. Okay. Let's see. They try to explain, I wasn't all that satisfied with how they explained it, but they made a nexus between the power of the mind to focus and the development of intuition almost as an autonomic response. They didn't put it quite that way, and they didn't link it as clearly as I would have liked or would imagine doing, but nonetheless, when the mind learns to be still and the mind can focus, what that means behind the mind is the chatter of the mind subsides, doesn't it? And we know as meditators that when that chatter subsides and the mind becomes clear, we begin to develop inner sight, psychic sight, the third eye. And through that is the window of intuition. But we also here at Ananda and in the yoga field make the linkage between intuition and feeling. And again, they don't really pursue this as much as other books do. It's not their purpose and so forth, and it's more something we do here. But the nexus between stilling the mind, the awakening of intuitive knowledge coming to us, and the feeling capacity of our consciousness, the feeling element of our consciousness being developed is an integral part of that expansion of consciousness. It's as if, instead of being like in Dwapara, when we use intellect and reason, like our culture in America specifically, being left brain, we have omitted or we obscure the feeling element of our perceptions. When the left brain, the chatter, the mind, the intellect begins to subside in favor of sort of a pure level of perception, it's as if the feeling now can start to balance. And in that feeling element, like music that touches the heart, we can absorb so much more perception. It's like the difference between what are those old modems we used to plug in? Those little 56K modems and a high band network, in other words. More information is contained in that. And so compassion and sympathy, knowing is felt, not merely thought. Okay? Intuition, you simply know. Compassion and sympathy is a natural extension, as it is for us through the process of meditation. They gave some wonderful examples. I'm not going to go into it. I'm particularly fascinated by the lives of these two men who they happened to choose, Einstein and Nikola Tesla. Tesla, though, fascinating thing they give in that chapter, how as a young man from Serbia, he really had no access to anything, money or laboratories. He was clearly a Treta Yuga man. He visualized down to the dimensions of every component of the electrical motor which he invented. He visualized it so clearly that when he finally got a laboratory, he built the very first electric motor and from scratch, and every part fit, and the first time he turned it on, it worked. I mean, this guy came from a different planet. So if you're interested in his life, it's well worth reading. Okay. Now, Yukteswara talk says that the intellect of mankind will be able to comprehend the divine magnetism, the source of all electrical forces on which the creation depends. Now, our authors go into various things there, and there just isn't time to. I want to focus on the two aspects of divine magnetism that our authors focus on, and it's good enough. Divine magnetism, they say, has one, the aspect of divine consciousness. So in Treta Yuga, humanity will more easily perceive divine consciousness within and without. At the same time, we will be able to perceive the consciousness out of which things arise. So it'll be an expansion of power, but at the same time, this expansion of the ego will be almost automatically balanced to a certain extent. Nothing's automatic, but to a certain degree, because we'll perceive that the power that we've accessed is universal. It is conscious, it's consciousness. And so there'll be a natural inclination to appreciate and to perceive the divinity latent in the universal consciousness that humanity will begin to use. Now, they point out that in this 3,600-year arc, of course, not only will that deepen, but it'll also become purer. Because there will be wars during this time. Another analogy they make, useful, I think, to people like you and I, Kali Yuga is like the physical sphere, Dwapara is more like the astral sphere, and Treta aligns with causal consciousness. Those of you who have studied these things can connect the dots there on your own. Okay. Demolishing time. Well, our authors had a fun time trying to figure out what that means with Dwapara consciousness. And I don't have half the brain they do, but it's fun to try to speculate what it would mean to demolish the barrier, the limitations of time. One obvious thing they point out that a Dwaparan can get pretty quickly, because we're so speeded up already, that we can understand that the power of thought simply can speed up processes. They can probably speed up the process of childhood to adulthood and maturity. They can probably speed up growing plants and so forth, like the way Luther Burbank did and George Washington Carver. So there's a power of thought power can actually speed up and demolish the normal constraints of time, like it takes so many months to grow something that we associate with the so-called natural world. But another, probably more interesting to most of us, since speeding up our lives is not exactly anything any of us here in this room treasure particularly, even though it's a fact in Dwapara Yuga, but the ability to see the future is an obvious demolishing of time. To see the consequences of when someone's out on the deck there. Can someone let, it looks like Vaughn. We can see the consequences of our own consciousness if we pursue a certain line of thinking. I remember Swami Kriyananda saying many years ago, he said, I feel I've been gifted with the ability, whether counseling individuals or in guiding the organization of Ananda worldwide, of seeing where certain lines of development lead to. And the image he used that always made sense to me, at least it resonated, was the image of a railroad tracks. I grew up at, that's Kali Yuga kind of, but that's what I grew up with. My family had a lot of transportation, railroad connections. And so you see the railroad tracks and you follow them, and where do they lead? Okay, they come together at a point, at least visually, and they lead in a certain direction. And so when we make decisions, and that's always helped me in the work I do as well, though I'm sure I don't have it to his extent, where he could see if the community made a certain policy decision, that it would lead in a certain way or individually. And so the ability to foresee the future, to have a feeling, an intuitive feeling for the consequences of either the action you're choosing or somebody else or the people around you, is going to be a native ability of Tretans. We relive the past now in early Dwapara through our movies. And it's a wonderful thing that we've invented. Our guru, Yogananda, loved the image of the movies as a sort of a space and time annihilator. We can watch the movie The Gladiator or, Roman Empire things or even futuristic movies, and we feel like, that's it. I mean, that's had to be what it's like, Whether it was, I don't know, but we're able to do that now. Well, how they'll be able to do that without the agency of Hollywood. Let's put it that way. They'll be able to feel what it was like to be a gladiator or whatever it is. Okay. Now, they go into something I don't really want to touch because it's so beyond most of us that it's just worthless speculation. But apparently Einstein and his fellows, since Einstein's time, have all asked the question, since time is one of the parameters of height, width, whatever distance or whatever all those things parameters are, the three dimensions, time being the fourth dimension, scientists apparently can't really understand why time seems to only flow forwards. According to Einstein and people like him, time ought to flow backwards just as readily as forward. So one of you have an answer to that, keep it to yourself. I don't want to hear about it. Okay. Now, but Einstein went further than that. He said, the future exists simultaneously with the past. Now, I have sort of an intuitive feel for that. I don't think I could put it in words, but the way they do it is scientists like Einstein, including Einstein also, posit this thing that we hear about, the existence of parallel universes. I'm not going to get into the quantum mechanics out of which they make such speculation, and it's only that speculation, but it has been put on the table of Dwapara thought, that parallel universes. And there's a quote from one of the ancient Indian scriptures, something about a universe in a dust mote or something like that. So it's out there, and it's probably true. Okay, so I wanted to give you this quote from Einstein. He says, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift." And that's a very Tretan thing to say. And so we on the inner path of meditation are specifically developing our intuitive faculties, are specifically accelerating our development into Treta Yuga. And so our authors make these connections. And I'm not all that satisfied with the words they use, but I have to trust that they know more than me, obviously. But I would tend on my own to put these in different ways. But what they say is Dwapara takes self-will and with the awakened intellect of the rising current of energy coming to our planet, develop energy awareness. And then they don't use control. I added that. Out of awareness comes the control of energy. I think these thoughts require more development. But anyway, they had a lot of material to cover. In Treta, self-mastery, in other words, self-awareness of our own mind's thoughts and so forth, leads to intuitive attunement. In other words, the power to attune ourselves to maybe another person, to our art or to our science or whatever our interest is. In other words, people in Treta, we think of ourselves, I'm looking around the room, I think all of us in this room view ourselves as very competent. Okay? In Treta Yuga, it'll be like a race of geniuses. Because of that power, of the mental power allows the intuitive attunement to whatever we do. We can master skills with great facility, and we can develop those skills, for better or worse, with, like geniuses would be today. Okay. Trends in Treta Yuga, Chapter 8. A truly civil society because all the scoundrels that we're used to having to deal with in our society, corruption in government and business, politicians who lie and who do bad things behind our backs and so forth, we will have an intuitive feel for people. And we'll know when they're lying or when they're dishonest and whatever. Those kind of traits, we think, we have, I don't say piracy, we have privacy issues today. Frankly, I sort of laugh at it. I mean, if you're a devotee, you seek transparency. Why shouldn't you put your whole life in front of everyone? Don't you want to grow out of the ego? Can you think of a better way to do that? Now, I mean, I can think of better things to do than that, but because it might not actually help you. But in terms of your fear of who's looking into my this or that, let it go. God sees everything. And in Treta Yuga, we're going to see right through each other. So let's start now. Let's develop that and be free. And let go of those things that we hide, first from ourselves, and then only we think we're hiding it from others, but we're not. So beauty will be not in outward appearance. Beauty will be in the nobility of character, of calmness and kindness and wisdom and vitality and yes, competency. Negativity will stick to us like a stink. And so we'll smell people like that. They'll smell bad, okay? And I think that's great. Selfish behavior will not be easily justified, as it is in Dwapara Yuga, by an appeal to self-interest, a.k.a. Adam Smith. We have this thing in America where self-interest justifies our behavior, brings to us entitlement. Okay, but in Treta Yuga, the expanding consciousness will look askance, look down upon people who appeal to their own personal self-interest in self-defense. Okay, politics. Democracy, they say, I don't have any personal thoughts on the issue, it's an interesting thought. They say democracy is the Dwaparan response to the Kali Yuga autocracy, dictatorship, brutality, monarchy, all that kind of hierarchy stuff. Makes sense to me. The internet is the quintessential symbolism for Dwaparan democracy. Level the playing field. What was Thomas Friedman's book called?
The world is flat.
Thank you. The world is flat. And it seems right to me. But democracy is something I'm very keenly conscious of, the inadequacy of democracy, because democracy is compromise. Look to Washington, D.C., is paralysis. Okay, look to the city of Seattle, paralysis. Everybody has to say what they want to say, and we have to be nice to everybody. And so nothing ever gets done. Okay? Majority rules the minority, and yet the minority can hamstring the majority. So it's very inefficient. And the system itself, if you have corrupt people running it, is just as corrupt as the old system. So it's only a marginal step forward. Whereas in Treta Yuga, and they don't expound much on this, maybe they will in other descending, I don't know. But we have inherited through the descending era the image, which doesn't exist anywhere except with people like Gandhi and a few others, but the image of the saint ruler, the image of the wise ruler, for example, is deeply embedded in our consciousness. The guru-disciple relationship is, a small aspect of that, but as it relates to politics here, the image of the saintly and wise ruler comes to us from a distant time. Can you change the slide? So I might be on another one. Well, I guess I'll come back to that. The way they presented this, I'm sort of stuck. Okay. The power, I sort of hinted at this, mind power, being able to see the consequences of those railroad tracks means that we can quickly, even through the mind, test the fruits of our actions. There's someone very famous who, in dialectical language and so forth, anyway, it suddenly escapes me, but very often with the power of the mind, we can see what's going to happen. Yes, and in Treta, and again, they don't expound much on that, but it's very much a Dwapara need to have this, which is that in Treta, when you're aware of your mind, you realize that all of your desires and pleasures are merely vicarious. They exist in the mind first and last. And therefore, by being able to dissect, to disassociate the thoughts of the mind from the objects of the senses, which in Treta will come naturally, but in Dwapara we're very much struggling with trying to do that, and meditation is the best way to do that, and with grace. The Tretan will be able to see through the illusion of imagining some sense experience or some possession or some experience out into the future will make them any happier. So happiness, people will be happier in Treta Yuga. We know from the study of the autobiography, we quote it so often, thoughts are universally, not individually rooted. And with that ready-made perception, which will be native to the Tretans, they'll have one up on us for sure. Okay, here's where I wanted to come back to. Tretans will, and I have to say it's my term, it's not their turn, so I hope the authors will forgive me. Tretans welcome spiritual teachers who have achieved self-realization. And then here's the point they make. In Dwapara, this idea of democracy, this idea of overthrowing the hierarchy means that we are not so much open to, like, the guru-disciple relationship, okay? We are resistant of spiritual teachers. We are suspicious of politicians, okay, good ground for that, but even spiritual teachers, some good grounds for that too. And so we have a Dwaparian native, latent, built-in resistance to that as we become self-empowered. Thus the religion of Dwapara is self-realization. But in Treta Yuga, they're going to get over it. Okay? They're going to realize through their sensitivity to thought and to consciousness, they're going to realize that a person who possesses a higher level of consciousness will be something they treasure. In Dwapara, we are moving from the anthropomorphic image of divinity to a universal image of divinity, and so our worship is taking impersonal forms largely. God is light, God is love, God is peace. God is Om. We commune with Om in Dwapara. But by Treta Yuga, when we're going to get over it, as that ego expands, we're going to be less resistant to and more open to the appearance of great spiritual teachers. And they will once again appear on the earth. And people will flock to them as in in the past. Even the declining eras had the remembrance of that. And it barely survived into our time. It has survived in India more than any other nation, the treasuring of the true spiritual teacher. But even there, it is fastly disappearing, quickly disappearing. Okay. Some war will take place during Treta as we begin Treta Yuga with the remnants of Dwaparan self-interest. And as they keep pointing out, in every yuga, there are peoples of all those levels. So there will be, Kali Yugans and Dwaparans armed with Treta power who will use it for their lower ends. And they make it very interesting. This fascinates me. Maybe it's me again. When we look back to the declining, it's a lot more interesting. We inherited a chivalric tradition, knights in battle and armor and not chasing after damsels, rescuing damsels and all this other stuff. Okay, now they point out that during the chivalric era, all of that was not really true. Those were idealized images that actually came from a higher, mostly they raped and pillaged like anybody else that we know of. But nonetheless, the image of rules of engagement, the image of two great warriors standing instead for their peoples and having a battle on behalf of the others, we've inherited that image, will reappear in Treta Yuga. Do you see how that can work? Two people on behalf of whoever the opposing parties, rather than a war with, right now in Dwapara, we wipe out whole civilian populations as we did in World War II. We destroyed whole cities in Europe, and so we did in Japan. That's what we're doing now. We think that's okay to win at any cost. But as our consciousness expands, and especially in Treta, whatever war takes place, the rules of engagement will reappear. Isn't that interesting? I find it interesting. Okay. Daily life, they say, will mostly be similar to Dwapara. We'll have marriages and, kids and go to school, and for the most part, at least they think so. But the population will be probably extremely less. Less bigness, cities, who wants cities? Small is beautiful. Fewer people will live in places like Monterey and wherever, beautiful places anyway. Classes will be... Camino Island, right. Will be stratified more by consciousness. The caste system will reappear in its natural human form. Whereas Dwapara, we value one another, or we value things by assigning monetary values. Okay, how much do you make, Treta will value character, nobility. The people who are, rise to whatever eminence, or won't be movie stars or sports figures, but people with high values. Okay, lessons of Treta. It won't be paradise yet, at all. Padma can tell us. But we will be happier. We'll learn to use personal power. We'll learn to attune ourselves with divine consciousness. And there'll still be a few Dwaparans around. Any questions? Rashmi.
I was just noting that, don't we now figure people out by vibration? Like I guess those of us in this room, figure people out by their vibration, just like you described.
Yes.
Tritons do, and valuing people. Don't we appreciate people's self-realization? Doing that in this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, people like we do already. I mean, that comes natural to a refined consciousness, or more natural anyway. But there it'll be part and parcel of, yeah. And I think that, he didn't say it, but I think that's true of things like beauty and art. Simplicity, even in whatever tools or whatever technology that may still exist at that point, it'll be simplicity and aesthetic, values. Now that's me speculating a bit, but it seems to make sense. Other comments, observations, thoughts?
I'm wondering about the war aspect in Treta. How could there be wars and conflict and...
Well, because people, the way they explain it at least, and it makes sense to me, is that people in Treta will have a lot of personal power, a lot of personal magnetism. And if you've ever sensitively studied the lives of even great saints, what to mention people considered great in other ways, you will see, as we have seen here at Ananda, even among advanced disciples of our Guru, Yogananda, differences of opinion. And, like titans out of a superhero's comic book. In the Mahabharata, think back, or in the Ramayana, what's his face, Ravana, for example, is worshipped as a superhero, as a god in Sri Lanka. I think that is what we will see. Yeah. Masha.
I just had a thought as you were speaking about the fact that in Dwapara we're inclined to reject the idea of a guru or following someone as a realized person, and it, part of it is that even if you are open to the idea, we don't have the intuition to realize who is that self-realized
Good point.
person. And it's kind of like in our age, in Dwapara, it's almost the most difficult era, because in Kali they were really, even though it was primitive, they were really strict primitive rules.
Yes.
And you knew who you were. And
You're not going back to Kali. I don't care what you say.
If I go back, I'm taking you with me. So, in Treta Yuga, we have highly developed...
In Treta Yuga, they could curse each other, so please be careful what you say.
When we're communicating mind to mind by pictures, if you can still tell your jokes. That's in the side. In Treta Yuga, we will have intuitive knowledge. But in Dwapara, where we're using the rational mind can lead you in any direction.
Yes.
So it's harder to know anything.
It's a very good
You're
point.
kind of stuck. You don't know, it's hard to believe in anything because you
That's
don't know what's right.
That's right. No, Masha, those are all very, very good points. And, just to say it, I keep saying this, but people gathered in a place like this, having a more refined consciousness, we've had some degree of success in parting that particular veil. But yeah, in general, we see a lot of that.
It's interesting to think about what Master will bring in Treta Yuga, figuring that in some ways what he's brought now has elements that at least we're conceptualizing it's a little bit like Treta, mostly Dwapara, and how like the Yoga Sutras might be rewritten in that time, what the religion of the quote, I don't know the right term, but avant-garde, people that are like a little ahead, but not the most refined will be like.
Yeah. Yeah, imagine the Yoga Sutras in Treta, huh? I mean, it would open up like a book.
Is it just we're going to understand them better? Or
Yeah.
like rewritten scripturally?
They'll finally get the point.
It is essentially all the steps we're taking
Yeah.
on the spiritual path. I mean, it's the undoing of the layers that are, the yugas describe our inner process, don't they? Can you all see when I stand next to it like this? I was wondering. Can you see this? Okay, because I'm going to follow the outline too. So Satya Yuga is, of course, the one that it's at the top of the spectrum, okay? And it begins in what says here, 7700 AD, and there's the 400-year Sandhi. So in 8100, we're in Satya proper, and then in 12.1, we begin the Sandhi, the final transitional, before we go into Satya declining. So Satya, similar to Kali, we've got the ascending and declining right next to each other, so we get some real direct experience. Okay, let's go. So Hriman described, as they describe in the book, the relationship of Treta Yuga. Well, in Satya Yuga, it's as if we're a child trying to understand not an adult, but a saint. Okay, it's a very big leap. The Sri Yukteswara has that saying that God is not a venerable personage adorning the throne in some antiseptic corner of space. God is pure consciousness. And in Satya Yuga, we begin to experience that reality, that we're an expression of that consciousness. And we understand that that consciousness is a part of God consciousness. And we experience the reality of being a part of that divine consciousness. So it's a little bit like the peeling of the onion was the analogy that they use. Satya is like taking off the final wrappings until we get to the pure center of our soul and the direct experience of that. And they use that analogy of my favorite elephant story, of the 5 blind men trying to describe the elephant, whether it's, the wall, which was the big side, or the stump, their legs that are the poles, or, the trunk, that's the rope, and they each describe it in a different way. And they're all parts of that whole. Well, in Satya, we experience the reality of that whole, and all those little perspectives start to peel away. Let's go to the next one. They describe Satya Yuga as being the stage of direct intuitive perception. So the indirect perceptions of the lower ages were the intellect, that's how we perceive things, intuitive reason, using the mind intuitively, intuitive attunement, trying to attune ourselves to a higher reality, whereas in Satya, we have that direct intuitive perception. We're actually experiencing that reality. There's no emotional or mental process to go through. We're just there. The heart and mind have to be completely still in order to perceive intuitive, direct perception. And when we're totally, unshakably fixed in that direct intuitive perception, we are self-realized. So that's what I was saying earlier. These yugas are really the stages of our own inner evolution. They are this very path, this inner path that Yogananda has so beautifully outlined for us and shown us the signposts of. It says here, they say not everyone in Satya will attain self-realization, but everyone in Satya Yuga will be striving for it. It'll be the clear, direct path everyone is consciously working on. Let's go to the next one. Life is a school. So we don't just learn about self-realization, we actually deepen our own perception of self-realization. It's no longer an intellectual, philosophical process. It's the reality of our own direct experience. A lifetime, as opposed to in Treta, the average lifetime in Satya can go up to 400 years. So we have like 4 centuries to work on this in one lifetime. It's pretty amazing, mind-staggering. The structure of society will be formed around centers of spiritual advancement. So as opposed to social structures, economic structures, agricultural structures, it'll be centers of spiritual advancement. All aspects of life, whether it's education, government, the healing, the arts, are all led by self-realized souls. Can you imagine? This is just so fun. Work will be seen as a way towards self-realization, not a way to pay our bills. Relationships will be seen as a way to self-realization and a way to learn how to give love rather than just receive love. Of course, these are all things that we practice in our teachings, isn't it? That we try to experience, but then we have our big egos in the way. We're not that ego transcendent yet in this stage. The arts will be instruments for higher consciousness rather than just individual self-expression. Even accomplishment will be seen as the perfect concentration, use of concentration and willpower rather than a way to climb the corporate ladder. So there's no material ulterior motives. Everything will be simply, purely expressed and lived for what it is rather than what it's going to give us. Rather than that Vaishya consciousness, it'll be in a straight experiential consciousness. Yes. Is Satya heaven on earth? They say yes, but I sort of question that actually myself because Master says there really is no such thing as heaven on earth. But the way I read it is it's like nirvikalpa samadhi. You're in the world but not of it. And that is living in that heavenly consciousness. It's a time of ego transcendence. And even if we're not perfect in it, we're all understanding that we're striving for it. And again, I say that, we often say that about living in our Ananda communities. We're not perfect. We are people and we go through our, ego things, whatever they are, our challenges. But we all understand what we're trying to do, and we're trying to help each other to do that. And so that's the difference. Let's go on. Simplicity. It's a time of simplicity. I love this part of it. In all the mundane aspects of life, eating, education, government, etc., everything will be refined but simple, not complex. There'll be humor and laughter. It's not this whole serious thing. It'll be a joyful thing. There's no isolation in Satya because from what we gained in Treta Yuga with our mental abilities, we'll be able to be communicating with everyone around the world, probably around the universe at that particular stage, not just only this world. We'll be able to manifest what's needed by God's power. We'll recognize God as the doer in everything we do. There will be, just like in Treta, it'll continue to be a declining of population. They're projecting tens of millions rather than the billions that we have right now. But even though it's simple, it won't be primitive. We'll retain the knowledge from the ages before us, and we'll use what we need to use for sanitation and education and so on. But we won't actually be using all of what's been created in Dwapara and even Treta in the prior yugas, because we won't have a desire for it. We'll only take and use what's actually just needed in order to live a simple life. Next. Conflict, strife, and the lessons. People are not yet perfect. There will be some disagreements. And part of that, they theorize in this book, is because just like in this yuga, Dwapara, there are souls like a Yogananda or, some of the great ones who've lived in this time who are Satya consciousness. When we're in Satya Yuga, there will be some who are not in the Satya consciousness, who haven't quite gotten there yet. There's some mixture, admixture of that in all the yugas. And so to that extent, there will be some conflict. It won't be perfect, but it'll be a whole lot better than what it is now. Mother Nature will be more harmonious because in general, the consciousness of everyone will be more harmonious. But we still have to deal with illness, old age, death, the challenges, those kinds of challenges individually. It'll be a challenge. The way Yogananda describes the astral plane is the colors are beautiful, sounds are beautiful. It's exquisite in the astral plane. But you can't work through karma in the astral plane. So you can enjoy all that beauty for as long as you have good karma. When your good karma runs out, you got to go back and do the work for ego transcendence. And so that's sort of the way these guys are describing also Satya Yuga. The challenge in Satya Yuga is not to become complacent, not to become satisfied with how beautiful things are, and not keep striving for that final freedom in God. So after all those, this whole 12,000 year cycle will be at the pinnacle of all human development on Earth when we're at the end of the ascending Satya. So let's go next. So they had this chart in the book, and it might be easier for you to see actually in the book, but they state the yuga, the motivation of the general motivation of consciousness, the perception, the comprehension, and the dharma. And in Kali Yuga, the motivation is positive acceptance, the perception is dull-minded, the comprehension is matter, it's material, it's the material age, and our dharma will be only 1/4 developed. In Dwapara, self-will, and these words actually go together, is the motivation. Awakened intellect is the perception. Energy is the comprehension. We become aware that all matter is energy. And the Dharma is about 1/2 actually developed. In Treta, the motivation is self-mastery, as Hriman was describing. The perception becomes intuitive. The comprehension becomes attunement. We're trying to attune to the highest in one another and so on. And the Dharma is about 3/4 developed. Dharma, right action. And then in Satya Yuga, the motivation is self-realization, final freedom. The perception is direct intuitive perception, as we described. The comprehension is that perception. And the Dharma, the consciousness is now fully developed in Satya Yuga. Next. So the descending, now we hit the pinnacle. Yes, sir.
I sort of understand the distinction between astral world and Sattva Yuga, but it would seem that the vast majority of people incarnated in Sattva Yuga came from an astral world, so there's probably still a lot of that consciousness. And the people bringing them down that might be from other areas won't be that many. So I guess there's a difference between the two, Sattva and astral, but I don't see a big difference between them.
I was just using that analogy because of what Master describes as we become complacent in the astral. And it's easy to become complacent even in Satya Yuga, is the way he described it. I don't think anyone is necessarily saying that in order to be in Satya you have to come directly from the astral, if that's what you're meaning. But, well, it depends on where our consciousness was at.
Move directly between the two worlds, the astral world and...
Yeah, to my mind, John, what you're saying is sort of what I was saying earlier, which is all of these yugas are really describing our inner evolution, our inner development, and the astral world is an aspect of that inner development. But they're two different things, the yugas and our inner development. You see what I'm saying? Okay. Anyone else before I go on? Yes.
I just have a question, it's just kind of running through my mind here. There's 8 billion people on the world right now, 8 billion souls, and here you're talking about a mere 10 million. Where are those other 8 billion?
It's half go to Venus and half go to Mars.
Yeah.
Isn't that right, Padma?
Have you heard of tsunamis? And, Master does describe major cataclysms and things where lots and lots of people are spun off.
Spun off where?
The universe is teeming with life. He said there are even beings on the sun, our sun as a star. So they have plenty of places to go. There are planets that are largely tamasic, some that are very like all Satya Yuga. There is no lack of places for people to go. Think of how vast this universe is. How could this mud ball be the only game in town? It's just statistically impossible. So there's lots of places. Don't worry. Lots of places to go.
Can I move on? Oh, Rashmi.
I was just going to say two things. One of them is that, where the teacher is assigning people to do mental work if they need to concentrate more and, make them do gardening if they need to bring the mind. That sounds like what Swami used to do with you.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just...
to balance our natures.
And the other thing is that I guess because we're not evolved where we would reincarnate in Satya, to try and get to eventually evolve because we can work out karma easier in the physical plane.
You can work out karma easier on Satya than you can in the astral realms. That's a good example. Yeah. Okay? Because it's still on this plane.
And then the cycle of the one age of Brahma, does that conclude it then as soon as...
No, that's a different cycle. Age of Brahma is vast. There are many different cycles, right, Morley? Yeah. In Indian system.
Those of us who are here would have been going through like the Kali Yuga all the way to Satya, and then we may or may not finish then, so we keep coming around.
Yeah, or we may or may not
yes.
do it all on this plane. We may go to other planes.
Master talked about people who would be withdrawn into the night of Brahma and come back again. You don't want to go there. Do you know how many 24,000 year cycles there are in 4-point-something billion years? You just don't want to don't think about it.
You want freedom.
It's
okay, so we're going to
staggering.
talk about that. Only we don't get it in descending Satya Yuga. But I do need to focus here because it's 8:45. So now we're going into that stage, that age, 11,500 BC and down to whatever that was that we talked about. The, how many thousands? Satya, 6. Yeah. So the point I'm trying to make is, in our history books, we see dinosaurs and we read about primitive man and all that. There's a lot of misconceptions about what it was like 12,000 years ago, 11,500 years ago, and what was really going on this world. We have Stone Age cavemen. They talk about the 3 big misconceptions: the frigid ice age, and that people were superstitious and primitive. way back then at the beginning of descending Satya, when they were coming from the very, very highest consciousness that we had attained. So let's talk about these. The misconceptions born of the Stone Age cavemen. My husband would be better at this part, but
This is one of the most fascinating chapters in the whole book, really.
yeah.
There's some
But
good stuff.
essentially, it begins with the misconception of Darwin, the belief that we evolved from a more primitive version of man. I mean, we begin with that thought. We're trained with that thought. When Darwin's theory was taking hold in the 1860s, okay, so that was in the Sandhi of Kali Yuga, science thought the world was about 50 million years old, not the 4.5 billion years that we're thinking today, and God knows what the real truth is, because we're still on that spectrum of just finding out. So the age of the earth was misunderstood, and this misunderstanding adds to the confusion. If man evolved from primitive, then it must have happened recently, they thought, because the world was way younger than we now know that it actually is, and we hope that what we now know is actually correct. It could still be a lot older than that. So if scientists in Darwin's time knew that the Earth was 4.5 billion years old, they might have speculated a longer timeline for human evolution. So that whole primitive thing, might have been way, way back there rather than just 11,500 years ago. So since they didn't have the correct timeline, they pinned it at 10,000 BC. That's how, by the Yuga theory that we're looking at and that Sri Yukteswara suggested, offered, that misconception crept in, and so a misunderstanding about the consciousness. Let's go to the next one. There were discoveries by paleontologists. The Piltdown Man was proven to be a hoax. The Java Man was put together from bones found 10 meters apart, one from an ape, and some thousands of years apart in age. So science just sort of put it together before they knew how to actually test for those things. Neanderthal man is at least 1 million years old and believed to be the same species as modern man and not primitive man. So that's what the thought is today, rather than when they were first discovered. And Cro-Magnon man, the current thought is that he was an early modern human and not a separate species. Originally thought a different species because of the larger skull, but now we realize that species have devolved rather than evolved. So the next slide. Intelligence also had a much longer cycle, not just bones. Archaeologists have found ancient stores of cultivated grains in Israel growing and milling for 23,000 years. Afghanistan had goats and sheep domesticated 15,000 years ago. Fired pottery was found in Japan that dates to 12,000 BC, right around this time. Items, now that they go on to describe that items of fabric, wood, metal, plastic, even concrete, will only last a few thousand years. So you won't see them, a few thousand years from now. All that's left to the naked eye 12,000 years later will be stone, hence the Stone Age. People say in Satya, people in Satya may have lived simply, much like Babaji and his band. In other words, Babaji and his band lived in a cave, was a fully realized master and really, really, really high the soul disciples, a few of them. And they hung out in a cave with their loincloths, You find that 12,000 years later, you find remnants of any of that, and you're going to think they were living like cavemen. But they were highly, highly evolved beings. They just simply weren't in a material age, surrounding themselves in a palace. They lived in nature. They lived simply, which is what you do in Satya Yuga. Even in the midst of this material age, our idea of taking a vacation is to get away from technology, to go into nature, isn't it? Okay, that's because of the consciousness that we're vibrating with when we're becoming more and more spiritually refined. Next. There's a quote they have in here of Mary Sedagast in Plato Prehistorian, a book that she wrote. She said, the more we learn about early man, the more difficult it is to describe him as primitive. Archaeologists are aware of the inadequacy of the existing framework of thought. Seeking a new paradigm, our most basic assumptions about the way things were may have to be uprooted, at least temporarily, and the old model let go in its entirety. Next, the Ice Age misunderstanding. We thought that the Ice Age ended 13,000 years ago. However, we're in an Ice Age that began 2.6 million years ago, when ice remained permanently on the poles. Geologists believe Earth was completely covered by ice in 2 prior ages, though not in this one. Geologists also believe that there have been many periods lasting hundreds of millions of years when there was no permanent ice at all. Glacial maximums, this is the first time I heard this word, I'm not a scientific reader usually, but he calls them glacial maximums and minimums when ice retreats or goes towards the equator. So what ended up approximately 13,000 years ago, when permanent ice had again begun to retreat toward the poles, where it is now, was the last glacial maximum, not the Ice Age itself. Okay? So the next slide explains this grand misunderstanding. He says just a few degrees in shift of the average temperature annually can be the beginning of another glacial maximum. Though there's less land due to ice masses, what land is around is arable and beautiful. So where there was the Sahara Desert and some of the really, really dry places on the planet today, there were mixed forests, there were grasslands. They had what was desert had a lot more rain than it does today. So it was actually quite idyllic in this particular time frame. Food was abundant, both wild and cultivated foods. There were plentiful between 17,000 and 7,000 BC, the ascending and descending Satya Yuga. It was like being in a perfect climate, not too cold, not too hot, mama bear, papa bear, baby bear. It was mama bear weather, if you know what I mean. Plenty of evidence that ancient man was not a hunter but a vegetarian because there was a cornucopia of fruits and vegetables. And fossil remains show the decline in nourishment comparing ancient man to modern man. So our nourishment's actually way worse, and not just because of processed foods, but because our climate has changed. And back then in Satya, it was actually idyllic. Most of the earth was like a paradise, except for the poles, of course, as it describes. So next one. The third misconception was superstition, and people were superstitious and primitive was the statement. Western science today can't deal with non-material realities. Everything that science tests has to be tangible in some manner. Even if it's an atom that can be seen, it's still something physically tangible. So they assume that it's solely delusions within the mind of the person experiencing it when it's something intangible. It's a basic assumption. They believe, a lot of modern science believe in that deception, as in many priests and shamans, etc., that they're con men, that they're people just taking advantage of one another with their untestable, non-material realities that they're sharing with people. Therefore, modern archaeologists, anthropologists decide that earthly man must have been superstitious, gullible, and stupid. It's like an argument in a circle, because as soon as you're talking about a non-material thing, that's got to be the reality. They have no concept of Treta or Satya, where we're talking about the thought and consciousness. An example that they give in the book is they found a 90,000-year-old carved snake in Africa. Apparently it was exquisitely done. There was an immediate assumption. Well, there were a lot of assumptions, and it mostly had to do with unfounded superstitious conjecture without any actual proof. There were all kinds of stories that grew up around that statue that was founded. They found some little piece of something nearby, and the conjecture was that, the priests must have stood 10 feet from this thing and done special ceremonies with it. And, there were all kinds of conjecture woven around it. And we know from the Indian philosophy that the snake is representative of the kundalini, of the spine, the danda. And so it could have had been a spiritual symbol as well, but this is not taken into consideration at all. It could have been an exquisite carving of representing our kundalini and the inner challenge. Let's go to the next slide. And so they talk about the fact that there are different explanations for these things. And a lot of what archaeologists and paleontologists and whatnot are doing is conjecture. They're offering possible interpretations of what they have found based on these other misconceptions of primitivity and so on. So they had another quote in here from this man's book, Memory and Visions of Paradise, Exploring the Universal Myth of the Lost Golden Age. And he says, as I came to see through the eyes of the primordial myth makers, my own view of life and human culture was transformed. I began regarding modern religions as remnants of formerly universal spiritual tradition, and the history of civilization as the record of humanity's progressive loss of its original egalitarianism and spontaneity. So he began to see that devolution of spirituality in the declining time. Let's go to the final, I think this is the final, yes. Yogananda likened spiritual science to mathematical science. He says you can destroy the text of mathematical science and it will be rediscovered because they're basic truths. In the same way you can destroy the texts of spiritual tradition, the scriptures, and it will be reinvented because it's based on our inner eternal truths. Spiritual experiences and truth are relative to the experience of the individual, which drives science crazy. Okay? Just as medieval science placed the earth at the center of the universe, modern science places material realities at the center of the cosmos. Once it was discovered that the sun was the center of the universe and not the earth, everything made sense scientifically, because they were having all kinds of problems trying to prove it with scientific measurements, because it didn't work when the earth was the center of our universe. It only worked when the sun was. The same will happen for spiritual realities. Once we don't worship material reality at the center of our understanding, but begin to see and experience and relate to spiritual realities as the center of our reality, everything else will begin to make sense. Satya Yuga was not superstitious, but a time of wisdom, harmony, and grace. And then they go on to say, there can be more than one interpretation of the remnants found from the past. Let's be open to new interpretations, because that is all they are, interpretations. Okay. Some of you I know need to leave right at 9. Feel free if you do. If others have questions and want to stay a little bit, we're here to answer questions. Yes, John.
We talked in early Zen Kali Yuga about the loss of masterpieces and knowledge, like the burning of the library in Alexandria and others. Plato will live sometime in that period, talked about civilization of Atlantis. I don't know if we have a place in time, I don't think so, but that also was civilization. Would be great wars take place that either break the mold going upwards and bleeding upward, or going down to the lower age.
And those happen because of the disharmonies in consciousness. They draw those wars and cataclysms and things.
Going up and going down.
Going up and down, absolutely, yeah. Other thoughts, questions? You know, before you all leave, and many of you have left, but we wanted to share with you that we've invited Vyasa, one of the authors, to come up and join us on March 11th. He's going to be here, and he's going to make a presentation and answer questions. So if you have questions, get them ready for the author. Other thoughts, questions? Yes, Fawn.
We are encouraged to live in this life to become a Jivan Mukta.
Yes.
So for a Jivan Mukta, where does that soul belong? Does he belong to the end of this Yuga cycle?
Satya? Master encourages us to become a Jivan Mukta in this lifetime. She's asking, where in this cycle would the consciousness of a Jivan Mukta be? Satya Yuga. Yeah.
Even the Satyans, aren't they also evolving?
Yeah, you still have past karma to work out as a Jivan Mukta. You're not creating any new karma as a Jivan Mukta. You're free in the world and not of it, but you still have past karma to cleanse, and you can do it through visions and dreams. Yeah. So you're not quite fully perfect yet. Yes.
I had the same thought as Dennis, that you have so many people now, and everybody is at a lower consciousness. And if you look at the pyramid here, you know, the people that are Satya Yuga are way up there. And then we're talking about how the population is going to go down in the future. So are you just shedding the people that are in who's going to be drawn as, you're talking two different things. One is that as the Earth moves in space, the consciousness is raised, so the people that don't have raised consciousness aren't going to be born.
On some other planet, adorning some other planet, as Sri Yukteswara said.
So I guess what I'm thinking is our consciousness being raised, or in souls with raised consciousness being attracted to the planet?
It's, I mean, the way Sri Yukteswara describes it, it's because we are, closer to that dual, and we're getting the rays of that energy that is uplifting, helping to uplift our consciousness. So it creates a more uplifted place, and that's where souls who are ready to live that are then drawn.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, yes, effectively, yes.
So effectively,
Out of 1,000, one seeks me, yeah.
so effectively the ones that are stuck in Dwapara Yuga consciousness would come back when we come back to the descending cycle.
Or go to some other place in the universe, yeah.
Spiritual evolution is not automatic like being on a Ferris wheel. It doesn't happen that way. You have to make the effort.
We're talking here beyond our own experience, but I'm speaking about the way I understand that Master described it and taught it, and the way I've understood it from Swami.
So it sounds like the higher your consciousness, the easier it gets.
Everything gets easier except that you become, you don't have as much motivation to keep going, so you have to, that's the hard part, the self-motivation to not just become complacent, yeah.
Everything about Satyuga that is Ananda, is the way, the whole path is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, well, are we out of place, or, what's...
So what's wrong with me?
Well, Master was a Dwapara, he introduced Dwapara, essentially. He's a Dwapara master. And he came to give us Satya. I mean, he came to give us everything.
Om and, self-realization, or the direct perception of intuitive awareness, are everything that we do in our path is essentially even just placing people where they need to be rather than where they would be the most useful. It's all Satyuga stuff, so
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like it doesn't-
We're very blessed. Yeah. Yes, Karen.
I almost think of your question as like a yin-yang symbol, where if it's the dark, the Kali, going into the Dwapara, there's always that thought of the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just wouldn't work without that balance in a way, even though smaller communities of light are going to be smaller in contrast to, darkness or whatever you want to call that.
Yeah. But then Master also said that in this age they would begin to grow like wildfire. So it just has to get started. And then it will create a momentum, and it will keep growing because it's going in the right direction. We're in ascending Dwapara, so it'll keep growing. If it was the opposite, you had these fabulous monasteries in Ireland where they had, tremendous wisdom and knowledge, but they were in descending, and many of them got destroyed. And you think, well, how can that be? How could they destroy those? Those were incredible souls, but they were in descending age. Christ got destroyed. He got crucified. That's what happens to goodness. Yes. Who else? You had something?
Oh, I was just going to comment and say that I think both Master and Sri Yukteswara said that in any given age, there are those individuals that are still living in the past,
Right.
and there are those that are living ahead. And he came, it seems, to give us tools to move ahead.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Another way of putting that is not to judge your own self by these things. Why am I born here now has nothing really to do with Dwapara Yuga or the evolution of the planet. It's our karma has brought us here. Some of us feel, based on what Swami would tell us, that many of us have come to help be part of Master's work. So does that mean individuals have Dwapara issues? Not necessarily. So don't interpret the general to the specific for us individually.
It's like a person who gets a serious illness. And I've seen this so many times with devotees on the path. They go, oh, what did I do wrong that I've got this illness? I must have been a bad person. My karma's, Well, it can be a karmic thing, or it can be a test for transcending ego. And it's better not to twist your mind around. It's just going to be mental to twist your mind around, and you're probably going to be wrong. What you want to do is keep your consciousness on Divine Mother and meet the test, whatever it is. So, yes.
And when the discussion went to where all the souls go and all that sort of stuff, and I'm just in relation to what you were saying, at least for me, if you really want to twist your mind around, then you go to this parallel reality and parallel universes and time travel, and if there is no time and everything exists, past, present, and future, and so is there an aspect of each one of us in the past, in the present, and the future? And it seems to me that that's got to be true because Swamiji wrote a book about time travel, and so you go into that quantum physics, and so maybe I just can't go there. It's like, okay, I'm
here now.
I'm just here. Because, it's like, whoa.
But when we're in Treta, we'll be able to go there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember reading on a bathhouse wall, how you go in there. This one thing said, God created time to prevent everything from happening at once.
Well put. On that note, Om. Good night, all.